the media capital of the world.
Good evening, everybody. This is the Burbank City Council Budget Study Session, a special meeting being held this evening, Tuesday, February 19th, 2019. Today's flag salute will be led by Vice Mayor Springer. Would everyone please rise? Ms. Mullins, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Frutos.
Good evening, Madam City Clerk. Happy to be here.
Good evening. Councilmember Murphy.
Present.
Councilmember Talamantes. Vice Mayor Springer.
Here.
Mayor Gabalotti.
Here.
Thank you.
For tonight's budget study session, I'd like to invite Financial Services Director Cindy Giraldo to the podium to please present the item. After staff's presentation, council will open the public comment period. Good evening, Ms. Giraldo.
Good evening, Mayor Gabalotti and Director. Excuse me. Thank you. As you mentioned, we are here for our second budget study session focused on infrastructure. We do have a prepared presentation. Let's see if they can bring that up. So we have had this is now our second budget study infrastructure. There we go. Focusing on the city's two largest liabilities, which is the pension liability and our unfunded infrastructure needs. As we discussed at our last budget study session, our multi-year strategic plan, which included Measure T, the $9 million in annual council and labor initiatives of reoccurring savings, and Measure P, collectively put together in a much better financial position. However, our work does not end there. Through the use of better business models, additional cost savings, we'll be able to continue to find the resources that we're going to need in order to strategically over time address both our pension liability as well as our unfunded infrastructure needs. At the last study session, we focused on reducing pension costs, identifying strategies that address both cost components of our pension costs. We looked at how a multi-year funding plan could help keep our annual pension costs below that affordability curve. And we discussed the value of reserving additional funds in a 115 trust to allow for absorption of future CalPERS changes or market performance volatility. But tonight is not about pensions. Tonight is focused on infrastructure. And I thought we would start with a brief 10-year look back at some of the capital improvement projects that were completed over the past decade. Over the past 10 years, we completed 4 significant municipal facility capital improvement projects. We built our LEED Gold certified community services building, which currently houses our Public Works, Parks and Recreation, and Community Development departments. The DeBell Clubhouse with its beautiful craftsman-style architecture. We completely redeveloped the Verdugo Aquatic Center, which now includes a very popular activity pool. And with more than half of the cost funded through awarded grant dollars, we redeveloped our Johnny Carson Park. So in addition to those facility improvement projects, we also had a number of great transit and street-related capital improvement projects. In 2009, we completed the Burbank Boulevard Beautification Project, which added some beautiful landscaped medians to the street. We also expanded our bike network with the Class 1 Burbank Channel Lake Alameda bike path. And most recently, we re-engineered the San Fernando Boulevard and Burbank Boulevard intersection to allow for better traffic flow, pedestrian, and bike safety. Now, while we can certainly be proud and recognize the success of those projects and many others that weren't mentioned, it is also important to recognize the significant funding shortfall that existed for maintenance and programmatic capital. Everything from deteriorating street pavement to tired and unpleasant restrooms and inefficient and outdated irrigation systems, parking structures lacking modern lighting, security, and at times basic cleanliness, and aging roofs and gutters. Now, while the city was able to provide some funding, it simply wasn't enough. The backlog of maintenance and routine programmatic capital improvements of our existing assets is readily apparent. So as we move forward, planning our next 10 years of infrastructure improvements, we must remember to prioritize the maintenance and care of our existing city facilities and amenities. And the Burbank community actually agrees with this assessment. As part of our multi-year strategic plan, Council will remember that twice we surveyed the community about what was most important to them. And overwhelmingly, they seem to agree that properly maintaining our existing facilities and assets was more important than adding new community amenities. So if we want to move forward successfully with the multi-year capital improvement program, which aligns with our community's desires, we will need to not only protect the dedicated funding that Council has already established, but as our operations allow, increase the funding for capital in order to better meet the existing need. We need to implement the governance requested by our voters through the establishment of the Infrastructure Oversight Board. We will need to evaluate our staff's capacity to effectively and efficiently handle the increased demand for maintenance and programmatic capital. And then we're going to need to execute a work program incorporating best practice project management that allows infrastructure maintenance, programmatic capital, and eventually capital improvement projects to be completed in scope, on time, and within budget. So this seems like a great time to invite forward our Public Works Director, Ms. Gibson, to provide a little bit of insight on how she sees our infrastructure plan moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Geraldo, and thank you for having me here this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me go ahead and walk you through some of the steps. All right, there it is. So it's important to recognize that the wheels are already in motion. So the steps that have already been taken by all of you to date is that there's a proposed infrastructure oversight board, and the framework has been set up. It will be back to council on March 26th with some more details and for adoption. So with this, having a supportive infrastructure oversight board, that's what the citizens want. That's what they requested through the vote. That is an initial step that's been taken. And then we've also demonstrated a commitment that we're already going to provide funding for this. An annual commitment of a baseline of $4.7 million of general fund, and then no less of the Measure P, 50% of the Measure P funds to move this forward. That was all adopted back in October. So this plan is happening now. Just to reiterate, this is the framework that was previously presented for the Infrastructure Oversight Board. There'll be advisory and capacity. They'll help to prioritize and for the funding perspective. They'll monitor the status, so they'll be looking, as Ms. Geraldo said, at a scope, time, and money on every project. and that they will also assist in communicating the importance and be our infrastructure champions. This is an area that has been neglected over the years, as you are all very well of. So it's definitely the perfect time to start this plan in motion. And again, the commitment, just to reiterate, 50% of the Measure P funds will be dedicated for infrastructure repairs, maintenance, and improvements, and a continual and ongoing in perpetuity $4.7 million per year general fund baseline. So what are our next steps? Well, we need to develop an infrastructure plan. It seems quite daunting at this first step, this first process, but there is a way through this, and we just start chipping away at it. So we need to identify and prioritize our needs. We need to identify the necessary resources to deliver it, and we need to allocate the available funding and then look out to the future. So what exactly is infrastructure? Infrastructure is a collection of our physical assets, structures, systems, and facilities that integrate and act as a system and support our community. It is the cardiovascular system of the city. What keeps us ticking, what keeps us moving along every day. Examples include streets, sidewalks, parks, libraries, etc. It is not services, it is that infrastructure which supports those services that make the community robust. It provides for the health, safety, and quality of life in Burbank for our neighborhoods, businesses, as well as visitors. Here's a little quick snapshot of that. So to the right, we have what we call or refer to as enterprise funds. So the refuse, wastewater, water, and electrical asset categories are all supported currently by a revenue stream. They are very much in a process, in a system, because there is revenue that's coming every single year. And so they are really up and rolling and have a forward-looking process to them. The asset types to the left, the general, are predominantly supported by general fund, underfunded reoccurring revenue, or one-time revenue. So these are the areas that you see a lot of challenges in. And this is where we're going to start chipping away at it. So having an infrastructure plan framework, what are the key components? We need to identify our needs, and we look at 3 different categories: the maintenance, programmatic capital, and the capital improvement projects. So the maintenance is an area that has been severely underfunded for quite a few years, and you see that regularly in all of our infrastructure. So you might see paint peeling or just facilities really looking tired. And so this is an area where our investment dollars will be seen quickly. We do a lot of our own maintenance, but we've kind of been putting Band-Aids on spewing arteries right now. So now it's time to get out the tourniquets and really take care of that stuff. The programmatic capital is another area where that's regular and routine types of capital projects that may be done. And you'll see this especially like in pavement. It's something we do every single year. Citywide, it gets into a process. You'll also see it with like roof replacements or HVAC systems. So you wouldn't do one every single year on a roof or an HVAC system, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, HVAC, but you will need to do it across multiple facilities on a regular basis. So you just plan for that and do the necessary repairs and replacements as they are needed. And then the capital improvement projects are those big ticket items. They're the major projects. They're high value oftentimes, or high visibility. And those are the 1 and 2, the maintenance and the programmatic capital, give you that very systematic, routine, steady state type of work product. And then the capital improvement projects, you'll see spikes. So you plan for those. And then we need to prioritize our needs and our infrastructure needs. So for infrastructure, there are a lot of key drivers for moving it forward. Community input is certainly a substantial one. What does the community of Burbank want? What standard do we want? And how do we establish that? Health and safety is our number one driver. Obviously, we want to make sure our systems are in good working order in order to be able to maintain health and safety. You may have legal mandates in which if you don't comply with the legal mandate, you may have a risk of a fine. Condition assessments. We have a lot of condition assessment work that we need to do. We've done a pretty good job on our paving, and I'll show you in a future slide how that plays out and how important that is for planning your future. Service level standards, again, to what level do we want to maintain? What standard of care, I believe you have mentioned in the past, do we want to establish and hit that target all the time? We want to perform our maintenance and programmatic capital with sustainability in mind, that it gets its full life cycle out of the asset. And then also departments always have their finger on the pulse and know what the proposed needs are, and they may bring those forward on a regular basis. So the objective in all of this is to have a balanced infrastructure system. And again, it's many asset types that are integrating and working collectively. So you need to know what you have and what condition it is. We need to do the asset condition assessments. What service level standard are we going to do this to? What funding strategies might be out there, what's available, and then what do we need to do first? How do we prioritize it? What could maybe be put off a little bit later? What has to be done now? And this all goes into the life cycle cost analysis. So you do your value versus risk assessment. So we need to do this. What value will we gain out of it? If we don't do it, what is the risk? How much is that initial cost? What's the ongoing cost to maintain and operate it? And then at the end of its life cycle, does it need to be replaced, or can it be repaired or reutilized? And this slide, I like to call the yellow or golden oval the target for the golden egg. That's where we want to be. That's where we want to be swinging on the life cycle. So if we get too far to the right of that curve, we are just in repair mode, and we're very reactionary. We are there now. To the left side, you have really, really high capital costs, or you're going and just replacing, and then you're letting it get into a state of disrepair. It's okay for a little while, then it's going to start swinging back up to that other side and be in a high repair cost. You will not get very good value out of your money if you stay to the right or to the left on that curve. So our objective is try to fine-tune our processes, get all of our capacity in order, look for process improvements, and stay in that golden egg oval. So the voters asked for us to take care of what we have. This was a slide that was presented last year, and it collectively, it's been a list that has been accumulating for many, many years. Numbers are very, very rough estimates, but last year the exercise was taken to break it down into existing infrastructure needs and new infrastructure needs. So this tally of $470 million was what we roughly had for these 4 categories. And again, this is estimates, but you look at that and you go, wow, $470 million, that's very daunting. But there is light. So first, you start by looking at a commitment of funding the 3 buckets. Maintenance and programmatic capital, again, will give you that steady state work. So you're going to look at that and see that happening, that investment pretty much the same on an annual basis. And then you plan for the spikes with the capital improvement projects. This is another slide that was presented when we presented the pavement management program. And so this was when we came up with an estimate of an annual investment is needed of approximately $8 million per year to get our streets back up in good condition. And so the analysis that we did, and what this slide demonstrates, is that you'll see the green bars are deferred maintenance. So That's what we have not been doing. It's growing. And so over time, like, you slowly start chipping away at it, but you need to get to the tipping point. So if you only looked at a 10-year mark, you wouldn't see that downturn, that kind of, you're getting ahead of that deferred maintenance dollar investment. And what we did, there's a number of ways you can run this, but we thought, so what would be a good service level standard for our paving condition? We took an average pavement condition index of 65 and we ran the numbers. And that's how we got to this $8 million per year. So you can see about out in 10 years, you hit that target. And then a few years after that, you start reducing the deferred maintenance cost. So you're actually getting out ahead of it now. And then you can see the PCI starts rising. So that's interesting, right? You're investing the same dollar amount, but your streets are actually getting better. So you get to that point where you're taking good care of your stuff and you're getting a good return on your investment. And so you can then make those decisions. Well, I can either keep the PCI at 65, and maybe I can do something else. Maybe I can take that extra money that I'm getting out of this and do alleys. So it opens up opportunities and lets you really plan for a great future. So this was also the funding that was presented, and I think when the pavement management program was first presented as needing $8 million a year in perpetuity, that's a little heart thumper. But you take a look at it, and our existing investment was about $3 million a year. And then we had SB1 come along. So that's about it'll get up to about $2.5 million a year. So then what did we need out of Measure P? Roughly $2.5 million. And we got to $8 million. So here we are. A year ago, this seemed impossible. Today, it's completely doable. So this next slide looks at a multi-year plan, and I'll walk through this. So the very top portion, the letters that are in and numbers that are in green are revenue, and then everything below that is expenditure. So if we were to look at about 4 years, and we said year one, so we have a one-time contribution we have some general fund money, roughly $10 million. We have an RDA loan repayment that we know is coming for the next 2 years. So the year one, it would be $10 million. Then we committed to the 50% funding for Measure P. That's another $10 million. And then the general fund annual reoccurring commitment of $4.7 million. So there you have the $34.7 million in revenue. And then in expenditures, say roughly you need $3.5 million annually in maintenance. So that's going to be your maintenance bucket, and you'll see that carried across each year. And programmatic capital, say you need about $9 million per year. But then you also want to do some capital improvement projects. So let's say you look at it and you go, well, project A is $1 million. It's a high priority. We really need to do that. We have the capacity. We can do that. Today, we need to really work on building capacity, but we probably could handle that. So when you tally that all up, it leaves you with a balance of $21 million. So then you carry that up to the next year. So you're starting with $21.2 million. So you keep going through this exercise every year, and you look at your priorities, you look at your needs, and you just keep filling it in, and you keep readjusting and recalibrating as you go. So this scenario shows then maybe year two, you could do project B, which is roughly $4 million. Then maybe year three, you don't quite have that capacity to do everything. You don't have the RDA loan repayment, one-time fund coming in. So you scale back a little bit because you're saving up for project C, which is $15 million, and you're going to do that in year 4. So you carry forward that $36 million, and then you're still left with $24 million. And then we haven't even started to talk about other sources of infrastructure funding. So we have reoccurring funding that can vary, but for transit and streets, examples include Measure R, Prop C, Prop A, Measure M, RMRA, and the gas tax, to name a few. And then we are also going to be getting a water quality funding under Measure W, so that will be a new revenue. They are restricted, so they can only be spent on certain types of projects, so that has to be rolled into the consideration as you make your plan. We can also actively pursue grants. So as we start getting better at doing this and not reacting to everything, but planning and building our capacity and looking for ways that we can improve our processes and deliver in a timely fashion and within budget, it will give us opportunities to also pursue grants. So when you get into this steady state routine, it allows you to better strategize, and you can tee up a project and say, get it maybe to 70% design, and then go and apply for a grant, and you'll be much more competitive because your project's pretty close to ready to go. So that's another strategy to be successful in applying for grants. And other options that are a little bit unique and new, public-private partnerships, oftentimes referred to P3, and multi-agency collaboration. So an example here are the water quality requirements can be very, very challenging to achieve. But if you go and collaborate with others, you may be able to jointly use real estate, find some groundwater injection type opportunities. For example, LADWP, they've got quite a bit of land. So perhaps they would like to join forces and we could find a solution that works for everybody. And then the final bullet item on here is reprioritization of existing funded projects. So being agile and nimble in this process means you don't hang on to cash. You want to spend as you go and deliver projects quickly and timely. So there may be situations where you've got money sitting in a project and it's just not moving forward. Either that's capacity driven, or perhaps it's hung up in a legal situation or an environmental situation. And you go, well, you know what? We don't need $10 million in that project right now. Let's pull out 9. Let it keep going at its slow pace, but it doesn't need all that much. It's not going to make it to construction. Let's pull it out and let's spend it where it's needed. So then this slide looks at a continuation. So years 3 and 4 are the same as on the previous slide, just a repeat of it. But what we've added on this slide is a couple of these other options. So the restricted funds. So let's say if you look out into year 5, you get $5 million. And you'll get this throughout the years, but for just the purposes of this discussion, let's say you have a big transportation project that you want to move forward and you haven't had the money. So let's say you get $5 million in combined Measure R, Measure M, and then you get a one-time grant for $3 million. And then you found a project that can't move forward right now, so you got another $3 million, and you're going to throw that all into the bucket too. In the meantime, your Measure P money is growing a little bit. And then you want to get a $10 million project done. So you still have the money to do it. You're still moving through this process and you're looking for other funding opportunities. So you go out into year 6, you've got $28 million in carry forward, and you've got a big ticket item project you want to deliver, Project E. $45 million project, everyone's thinking it's never going to happen. You go and you find a public-private partnership, and they say, well, you know what, city, you've got a lot of prime real estate. I think I can help you build something that you need if you can help me build something I need. So they may come to the table and say that $45 million project, we're willing to pitch in $25 million. So you just reduce the cost of that project to $20 million. And wow, you can afford it now. And so you do this, you build a very large project, and you still have carry forward. So there is money available, and there are lots of strategies to stretch your dollar. So what does an infrastructure work plan rollout look like? Our next steps are establishing the Infrastructure Oversight Board so that we have the citizens' involvement in helping to guide it, providing transparency, and then making those decisions on how to prioritize and what moves forward. We really need to focus on deferred maintenance and programmatic capital because it has been neglected for so long. So we need to put our energy into that for now. Get those systems up and running more smoothly, and then start looking at building capacity for the capital improvement projects. So we plan for our future by funding and looking at alternative funding options, identifying our capacity in-house and how we augment and how much we can deliver. Are there smarter ways we can deliver? Are there faster ways we can deliver? Can we collaborate with others to get things done? How do we prioritize what rises to the top as the need? And then we go through our implementation plan, and this is ongoing forever. So you just keep fine-tuning and looking for those opportunities, and they will appear. And as we get better and better at this, opportunities will come to the top. They will rise to the top, and you make it through it. So upcoming council items to focus on. The mid-year will be presented on March 5th, and the Infrastructure Oversight Board will come for adoption on March 26th. And then the first dedicated budget meeting begins on April 16th. And with that, we would be happy to take questions.
Well, first, we're going to take public comment.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And before I go over the public comment, I just want to announce, because there are no other city meetings being recorded today, this budget session is currently live on our city channels. So if you have your phones out there, text everybody at home and ask them to tune in because it's live on our city channel. Thank you. Now is the time for public comment. Any person speaking may address the council on this matter only. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. City Clerk Mullins, do we have any comment cards?
No, we don't.
We do not. We have one hand up. Does anyone else wish to speak this evening? Other members of the public? And then following public comment, council, it'll be our turn to ask all the questions that you want to ask. Thank you. Our speaker is Maria Coronado. Good evening.
Good evening. The subject tonight is infrastructure. My name is Maria Coronado. I'm a graduate of Leadership Burbank, class of 2018. I work for the Southwest Carpenters. I would like to address the infrastructure, remind you to consider using the lowest responsible bidders, contractors with a proven track record who employ a skilled and trained workforce. I'm not aware of what our current process is within our city for vetting contractors. There is value in using a responsible contractor and could save our city money in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ms. Gibson, I think the council may have questions. So if there are no other speakers, I am going to close the public comment period. And council members, who would like to begin? Comments or questions? All right, Vice Mayor Springer.
These are for Ms. Gibson. On Measure W, do we have an idea of how much that will be for us? Is it a local return?
No, it is actually a property tax based on your impervious surface. And there's a formula that's posted. It is currently estimated that we should be collecting $1.5 million annually from Measure W.
and it's restricted.
It
what,
is- it
what
is
kind of
restricted.
project, for example, do you think it could be used for?
Some of the areas that they're looking at are groundwater recharging. They basically want to clean up the water. So it's a filtration, groundwater recharge, but at all points in a watershed. So it's very widespread, but it's predominantly like filtering the water, cleaning it through a process before it would get discharged into a waterway, a river, a bay, etc.
Thank you.
Anyone, Councilmember Frutos.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Gibson,
Yes.
in looking at your general fund infrastructure funding, I didn't see anything, I don't know if you've discussed it, want to see what your thoughts are. We have a big development that's coming for downtown, so there's a impact fee. What are your thoughts as far as when you're working with the rest of the team discussing these impact fees going toward critical infrastructure that are needed? Like you said, high profile buildings, high public type buildings. What are your thoughts about that?
So there's lots of opportunity there. So you can do it through the assessment for developer impact fees. You can also partner to have infrastructure improvements. Fairly recently, we actually had a developer partner with us to do a little extra paving around the perimeter of the project. So during the construction, that heavy equipment does actually oftentimes have impacts on the integrity of the paving, and so they were willing to come forward in doing that. So we have a keener eye to that now. When other agencies come and do work in our area, we're considering that also, as well as when like franchises are cutting into our streets. We're looking at areas for them to leave it back in a pristine way.
And looking at, say, Magnolia Park, the sidewalks, where does that sit in your view as far as maintenance? What needs to be done? What are you thinking about that area?
So one of the key components of that are the trees, right? And so we do have to start looking at, we actually are looking at replacement trees that are a little more self-contained and are not so destructive to the sidewalk or surrounding foundations. So that's an area that will be a long-term plan, but certainly one to be considered.
And looking at the life cycle of our central library, what are your thoughts? Is it worth investing to retrofit it, modify it, or would this be a long-term capital project that in the future we should be looking at putting a new building? What are your thoughts with that old building?
So I think there are basically two options. You could either refurbish the existing facility, or you may need to replace the facility. So there are different options, and you would just need to look at the whole plethora of impacts to that, the financial, the real estate, those types of things. But there are certainly are opportunities for us to do whatever it is that Burbank really wants for a central library.
And your assessment of our current police headquarters as far as public works maintenance, anything that is unusual about that building in the future as we're looking at the life cycle of it and investing money up front to keep it up to 100%?
So one of the things we need to do that we have not done is a condition assessments for our facilities. So that's all inclusive for every facility. We really need to take a better look at what we have and figure out what we need to do. And that's inclusive for all of them. Right now, it's I would say more just of what maybe people see or what we react to. Across the board, we are just very, very reactionary, and that's not an efficient or an effective way to be. So we're going to need to change our approach to that.
And in your current personnel that report to you in your department, is our team efficient? Is there a need for additional folks as we move forward and looking at this new idea and new view how we're going to deal with infrastructure?
So my very unbiased opinion is that I have an amazing team. They do a lot with a little. So first we need to give them some tools and to see how much they can do. So we need to figure out how much capacity we're capable of. But budgets have been really, really, really lean. And so the team has been good, though they're already looking for ways to make improvements and find efficiencies. They want to do a good job. They're successful when they're not seen, right? And nobody's complaining. That's our key to success. And so they're very, very service oriented and are always looking for ways to do an exceptional job with what they have. I think right now we need to focus on giving them better tools, giving them training, building that internal capacity that we just have not maximized yet. So start there and then see where we land and go from there.
Thank you, Ms. Gibson. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Talamantes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you for your report. It's very eye-opening. I noticed on the existing infrastructure needs, the slide that you presented to us, that's not in a priority basis. That's alphabetical order. That's what I determined looking at it.
That was just a reprint, basically, of a slide that's been presented in different ways over the years. And so, some of those might be able to fit into a different category. There's no prioritization affiliated with that
That's
at
what
all.
I figured out after going through my ABCs. And the original plan about 25, 30 years ago was the library was to go here. Yet the old, if people haven't been around here long enough, the old fire station was right over there. That was where the plan used to be, to go there. We just couldn't get the funding. I mean, we had monies set aside. We went up to Sacramento under the Measure L campaign. You're not in need. Burbank, you're not a city of need. We're going to go elsewhere with the monies. So it's been, I hope the monies are still sitting there, or they're that longer there. Okay. So we'll have to start all over again. But anyway, I would like to see that as well. I know you mentioned, if we've got excess monies going to alleys, to repaving the alleys. So that's not on the original. It's
No.
just strictly streets.
It was strictly streets.
We're working with. Alleys are nice to have, not need to have. Let's see. And I also mentioned about, I got a couple of comments that I wrote down that you mentioned, saying about not reacting but planning to pursue grants, and that we have to position ourselves for that need. And I've been pushing grants for all the years that I've been up here as a council member. I rather want the monies to go to Burbank than somewhere else. I know it's a lot of work. Putting a grant request together for staff, but let's set that aside and get the monies. And then strategies to stretch your dollars. This with the 3 Ps, the public-private partnership concept.
Yes.
Very important. And they're out there. If we have to reach out to them and see what, like you were saying, you've got a lot of land, so maybe we can work something out. You make it a win-win situation for the city needs as well as for the developer needs. And I think it's working in other places. It's going to have to work. It's going to work here in Burbank if really, really stick to it and make it a can-do attitude.
There's a lot of opportunity there, absolutely.
So pretty much, thank you very much for the presentation. There's a need. And like you said, the oversight board is going to be charged with a lot of these decisions that are going to be coming forward in the coming years. And deferred maintenance. The school district went through a deferred maintenance, kicking the can down the road like 30, 40 years ago. I mean, they were really... And that's what they were doing. I mean, just not putting it off. Band-Aid here, Band-Aid there. In the long run, it costs you more. But I see us going in the right direction, especially with visionaries like yourself, Mr. Davis, and the rest of the staff that are involved. So thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
No questions. You have him bowled over, Councilmember Murphy. He's like, wow. The proposal for street pavement funding, it's going to be a base of 4.5 million from the general fund.
So the commitment was the $4.7 million
4.7.
in general fund, just as a baseline for all infrastructure. So that can go into any one of the buckets. Probably more
Okay.
ideally, it would be maintenance and the programmatic capital. And we would look at resurfacing as part of the programmatic capital, but where exactly the dollars come from, we're looking more of it as a $14.7 million annual between Measure P and the general fund commitment baseline. You have at least $14.7 million annually.
Well, I'm going to stay out of the weeds of the details because I think that that's probably going to be coming to us at a later point. I think it makes a lot of sense, though, to talk about, the framework, like Councilmember Frutos was talking about, suggesting a broader framework. So, in the spirit of planning to get lucky, I wanted to ask you if bonding for any large capital project will be part of the thinking, and if it hasn't been up to this point, I'd like to also see that funding option also is placed on the table. So we talk about pay-as-you-go, and we talk about harvesting money and carrying it over to a new year to take care of larger, more impressive projects, but then for and then P3, and then bonding as part of the mix. And maybe not specifically what, because at the moment I'm not interested in what, but I would say under what circumstances might it make sense? And what are the limitations, right? Because we can guarantee a payback to some level, but I'm sure there's pros and cons on it. Then the other comment I had was that you all think about whether or not Burbank's going to be in a very good position to make competition among developers who want to do P3 the new normal. That we're in a position to say, we want the best, we want the most creative, we want the most innovative, and our thinking drives us in search of that kind of responsive private sector partnership. Not that, gosh, we need something and that looks good or that looks good, let's do a development agreement. No, we're saying, hey, look at us. We've really stepped up. Our employees have stepped up. And now we're demanding that kind of performance by anyone who wants to do business with us, the city. And I emphasize and underline the word innovative, that as you build capacity, which I think is an excellent direction, and I'm very interested in building capacity, that we think about what role does innovative thinking, smart innovative thinking, not off-the-wall innovative thinking, play in driving that new normal of wanting the best, seeking competition, and looking for great solutions. When we are able, I think it would be really good, and maybe this is to Ron Davis, our city manager, to indicate to the community how some of the early money from the sales tax measure will be spent, particularly with respect to improving our streets or resurfacing. That we're taking small bites, like you said in the beginning. How do you do this? Just like one step at a time. But it's important, and perhaps important to the whole council, that the community see that we're also being responsive to the things that we heard through that initial survey. And then the last thing I wanted to ask is, as you move forward, what plans or what approach are you considering for community input, either on the priorities or the broad framework. Have you thought about going to the relevant boards and commissions? Not all of them deal in maintenance, capital, or programmatic spending, but we have some I believe, some strong boards and commissions, and I just wonder what approach will be taken to help engage them. I know the Oversight Board is going to perform a very distinctive function, but in terms of looking at preliminary lists or preliminary ideas or a broader framework, I would encourage you to consider going to the irrelevant boards and commissions for a discussion or a presentation, just so that they're brought into this. They're members of our community. We rely on them for their decision-making, and it's a good way to get some advice. And finally, I'd just like to conclude by commending you for stepping up and doing this.
Thank you.
The speaker raised a relevant question about lowest responsible bid. There have been stories recently about workers who were not properly paid. I don't want Burbank ever to be in a position like that we have some kind of oversight or a means to engage to make sure that people who are hired to do the job actually get the money they were promised. But I commend you for bringing this forward. And we have several staff here this evening who have also been very creative with grants, harvesting money, collecting it, and then using it in a productive way. And I look forward to that kind of cost containment continuing on the conservative side, even though we're going to pursue, I hope, the innovative side. So I'm looking forward to that. Mr. City Manager.
First, I'm going to say, Marnell or Cindy, you may need to bail me out with some little extra help here, but a couple of comments or responses to the mayor and other council members. One, Mayor Gabelletti's comment on you'd like to see paving now and the residents would. You saw some, you may recall, this year. With the initial SB1 money, council authorized a little matching money from one-time funds. And so this year we stepped up our paving program quite a bit. And so we paved more streets. This next year, staff intends, as part of the budget, we will bring you that $8 million and the blocks of paving that go with it. That's a remarkable improvement. You'll see as much in 2 years get done as used to get done in 5. So the amount of paving that's going to happen the next couple of years in Burbank will be substantial. It's just managing it that will be the challenge. At least now we have the funding and we know it's a program so staff can gear up. And they are. About bonds, that's probably best left for later when we have capital projects you want to do, but that we don't have money. And that's when you, of course, consider funding like bonds. So that'll be later as you prioritize projects. In terms of some of the creative thoughts, and have you considered P3s or what kind of things are you doing to make things more efficient? I'd like to give you 2 examples. One, you mentioned that there used to be on this site a Civic Plaza project. Actually, it was a city development agreement with yourself, and it just ran out, I think, November of this last year. And we chose as staff to let it run out, or I should say Mr. Ramirez convinced me to let it run out, partly due to his lack of staff, and partly he thought we should do this over with council, with this council. So as we deal with capacity, not only in Marnell's group, Public Works, but in community development this year, it is staff's intention to bring you back for consideration a new Civic Plaza plan. But it would consider elements like perhaps a P3 library project as a core element, where you bring in a developer. And we've had meetings with 2 or 3 very credible developers that are known in this region and asked them would they be interested if council wanted to go that way. And they said, absolutely, we'd be offended if you left us out. So there is potential to at least discuss a significant project with P3 developers if that were council's wish once you see the possibilities and you decide what direction to give staff. Towards that end, there's this administrative services building over here, which I think you know is tired at best. Marnell, let's be clear here, Marnell's team did a quick assessment on the utilization of this building, the community services building, with the idea if we were to move Park and Recs to Olive, could all the administrative services staff and IT, who needs a home other than the basement of City Hall, could we all fit properly in this building? And the answer initially is yes. If we did that, that would free that building or that land or both up. You would no longer need to maintain them anymore, or in the interim, you could rent it. But you were looking for innovative ideas. That problem probably hadn't come up yet. But staff has already been looking at how might we provide input to the process that otherwise wouldn't have even come up. And this is one. It suggests, subject to studying, that you might actually do the Olive Rec Center first. It's tired too. It's on the list. Long time been on the list, right? But why do it first? Because then you could move staff out of this building that would allow enough room to move all the staff out of that building, vacate that building, and no longer have to pay to maintain it or improve it, et cetera. Permanent savings. And get ready for the council's consideration of the Civic Plaza that always called for that building to be an entry to the plaza. It's not supposed to be there, right? But in any event, that building needs to go or at least be empty. It's expensive. So that's a couple examples, both a P3 possibility for a library and the utilization of buildings to maybe abandon one of our buildings. We just don't need it anymore if we use space well, which saves a lot of recurring money. So just a couple examples of, you hope staff's doing a couple of these things. Marnell, Cindy, Judy Wilkie, Patrick Prescott, he's the one who brought up initially, boy, do we use this building very well? The answer is no, we don't. So after Marnell's team studied it, they'll be bringing you some options that probably weren't on the discussion list before.
Councilmember Murphy.
Thanks. I think the beauty of a meeting like this, although it might be dry to some people, is that it brings comfort to the voters who are concerned about what the plan is. You know, they now have been clued into is what the plan is, that there is a plan, and they also get a chance to see some of the bright people that work for them. The two speakers tonight, have kind of laid out a great plan. I was listening to Miss Gibson, and I'm thinking, geez, I'd like to go shopping with her because I always plan to get lucky. But it doesn't always work out that way for me. But it's just great to see what the plan is, that it's an intelligent plan, that it takes small bites, works well over time. It's all going to get better and better. And also want to thank Councilman Talamantes tonight on his birthday, coming to sit in on this meeting, and he's not feeling that well. So when it concludes, if you see him out there, wish him a happy birthday and thank him for his dedication. Thank you.
Councilmember Talamantes.
I don't know how to follow that up, but thank you, Councilmember Murphy. There's a couple of entities that I was negligent in not thanking, and that's the voters of our community. We wouldn't be here talking about these situations moving forward if it hadn't been for our voters stepping up and giving us the vote of confidence. They showed confidence not only in council members, but also the rest of the city. So I want to thank the voters for doing that, and as well as the labor organizations that have stepped up and been part of the solution. If we weren't working all together, we wouldn't be moving in the right direction, which we are now. And I believe that it had to be with the labor organizations as well as the voters of our community that stepped up and told us, you know what, we agree with you the way you're moving, and we want to make it a successful city of Burbank. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Springer.
This is a speculative question, and I know that P3s have been around a while, but they're still sort of new. I think maybe as a tool for cities and leveraging our assets and the money that we have. And in a project such as like a civic plaza, I don't know if there are any examples, but is it a possibility to mix housing in with civic?
Absolutely, that might be the easiest.
Okay, because it's a big site and maybe there's some potential there for that supply. Thank you.
Councilmember Frutos.
Thank you. Ms. Gibson, getting back to storm drains, it's 126 million for a 10-year out of the 470 million. Based upon the current storms that we've had and all the issues, is 126 million still within the ballpark, or is it increased? I mean, what's going on with?
So actually, a very small portion of that $126 million is for our drainage facilities, but there is a need there. The predominant cost involved in that is water quality compliance with the mandates. So that's where that initial cost estimate came from. And that's just putting in the improvements around the city to clean the water before it discharges anywhere. So it's very, very rough, but Measure W will begin to help to chip away at that.
And it's not a question, just more of a comment, and I'm going to echo with all my colleagues. I think what's really important for the residents to understand is the complexity of our city. We're now over, 107 years old, and I always try to tell folks that we might not be the Los Angeles that people don't want to associate us to, but if you think about the complexity of running our city day in and day out, with the exception of a port, we have pretty much, and within 17 square miles, an aging city, a growing population, especially our workforce during the daytime, that our city is tired, you know, and it's taken a long time to get to this level, and we always hear it, all of us, from all our constituents. Hey, you know, I remember Burbank the way it was 20, 30 years ago, and you guys aren't doing anything to repave my streets or, you know, fix my parks to the way it used to be. But in reality, we are. The five of us are very united to make sure that the policies that come before us, that we hash it out, we express our viewpoints, but at the end of the day, the five of us are very committed to address all these needs, and it's going to be our tough policies that the voters have blessed us with 60% coming out. And you know, who would want to tax themselves? Really think about it. But they've entrusted us, and I really like that we had these two separate study sessions, and I'm glad Councilmember Talamantes did acknowledge our city workers that really paid, you know, through their sweat and hard efforts during the hiring freeze, you know, keeping the residents at bay and letting them know that, hey, we're going to work through this. But you've really identified some really good issues that we all get as you know, from our residents. But I really like the roadmap, and I like that the five of us are very committed to make sure we issue, you know, whether storm runoff, roads, parks, and, you know, whether it's an aging, you know, old library that might have to be replaced. But at least the conversations are moving forward, and this is a great opportunity to really redo our city and make sure that we're still at that Cadillac level service, so the next generation and the new people that are moving into Burbank, you know, it's just not our schools, it's also our services. And you're providing the roadmap through our city manager, and thank you, and thank all the staffers that are here, and I see some of the worker bees here below the staffers, but thank you so much to everybody in the city family for the roadmap, and ready to roll up our sleeves. And council, I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot of discussions and priorities and policies, but I'm really excited for all of us to move forward to make our city even better for the next 50 to 100 years.
Well, if there are no further comments, we now adjourn to Tuesday, March 5th, 2019, in the council chamber at 275 East Olive Avenue on the second floor for a regular meeting. Good night, everyone.